We need to move quickly. Roger that. Stay sharp. Eyes on the objective.
Emma Reeves had been awake for 19 hours straight, and the exercise was only half finished. Her boots were caked with mud, her shoulders ached from the weight of her pack, and every muscle in her legs screamed for rest. But she kept moving, one foot in front of the other, through the dense forest that surrounded the training grounds. The night air was cold against her face, sharp enough to keep her alert despite the exhaustion. Around her, the other recruits moved in formation, their faces set with the same grim determination. They had started with 42 soldiers at dawn. Now, after a day of grueling obstacles, tactical scenarios, and minimal rest, 28 remained. The others had fallen out, overcome by injury, exhaustion, or simply the realization that they had reached their limit. Emma understood why they quit. Every part of her body was begging her to do the same. But something deeper, something she could not quite name, kept her going. Perhaps it was stubbornness. Perhaps it was the memory of her grandfather, who had served for 30 years, and whose uniform she had tried on as a child, drowning in fabric that smelled like discipline and purpose. Perhaps it was simply the refusal to prove right everyone who had doubted her. Lieutenant Graves walked alongside the formation, his eyes scanning each soldier with the practiced assessment of someone who had seen thousands of recruits pass through these woods. He was a tall man with a weathered face and a voice that could cut through chaos. Emma had learned quickly that he did not waste words, and when he spoke, soldiers listened. He stopped beside Emma, matching her pace. She felt his presence like a weight, heavier than the pack on her shoulders. "Reeves," he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "Why are you here?" The question caught her off guard. After 3 months of training, no instructor had asked her that. They had tested her, pushed her, criticized her form, and questioned her stamina, but never asked about her reasons. "To serve, sir," she replied. The automatic response drilled into every recruit. "Wrong answer," Graves said flatly. "That is what you are supposed to say. I asked why you are actually here." Emma felt her throat tighten. The truth felt too personal, too vulnerable to share with a man who had shown nothing but stern professionalism since the day she arrived. But something in his tone suggested this was not a casual question. It was a test, just a different kind than the physical ones she had been enduring. "I want to prove that I can do this," she said finally. "That I'm strong enough." Graves was quiet for several steps. The only sounds were boots on dirt, heavy breathing, and the rustle of equipment. "Prove it to who?" he asked. Emma hesitated. The honest answer was complicated. She wanted to prove it to her family, who had suggested she choose a safer path, to her friends, who had looked at her with pity when she announced her enlistment, to the recruiter who had seemed surprised when she passed the initial fitness test, to herself most of all. "To everyone who thinks I cannot," she said. "Then you are carrying more weight than that pack," Graves replied. "And that is going to break you." His words stung more than any insult. Emma felt anger rise in her chest, hot and sudden. She had worked harder than most of the recruits here. She had given up sleep, pushed through pain, and never once complained. How dare he suggest she was not strong enough? But before she could respond, Graves continued. "You think power comes from proving yourself to others. It does not. Power comes from knowing who you are when no one is watching, when there is no one to impress and no one to prove wrong. That is when you discover what you are really made of." He moved ahead, leaving Emma alone with his words and the rhythm of her own footsteps. She wanted to dismiss what he said, to fuel her anger and use it to push forward. But something about his words had struck something deep, something true. The formation reached a checkpoint where they were given 10 minutes to rest and refuel. Emma dropped her pack and sat heavily on the ground, pulling out a protein bar that tasted like cardboard. Around her, Other soldiers did the same, too tired to talk. Some stretched their legs, others simply stared at nothing, conserving energy. Emma looked at her hands. They were blistered and dirty, nails broken from climbing ropes and scaling walls. These hands had held weapons, dug trenches, and pulled fellow soldiers to safety during simulated combat. They were capable hands. Strong hands. But were they strong because she was trying to prove something, or because she had something worth fighting for? The question unsettled her. She had spent so long focused on being tough enough, fast enough, strong enough, that she had not stopped to ask what came after the proving. What happened when she finally convinced everyone that she belonged? Would that be enough? Would that bring the sense of purpose she was searching for? A whistle blew, signaling the end of the break. Emma stood, shouldering her pack once more. Her body protested, but she ignored it. She had become good at ignoring pain, at pushing past discomfort. That was what soldiers did. The formation moved out, and Emma took her place. But now, with every step, Graves' question echoed in her mind. Why was she really here? And more importantly, who was she trying to become? The forest grew darker as they moved deeper into the night portion of the exercise. Emma could barely see the soldier ahead of her. She relied on sound, on instinct, on the training that had been drilled into her body until it became automatic. Fear crept in at the edges of her awareness. Fear of failure. Fear of not being enough. Fear of discovering that all her effort had been wasted on the wrong goal. But this time, instead of pushing the fear away, Emma let herself feel it. She acknowledged its presence without letting it control her steps. Fear was information, not instruction. It told her that something mattered enough to be afraid of losing it. The question was what that something actually was. Captain Jasmine Torres stood in the briefing room, studying the map projected on the screen with an intensity that made her eyes burn. 3 red dots marked the last known positions of the missing patrol unit. 12 soldiers, cut off behind enemy lines after a supply convoy was ambushed 48 hours ago. Communications had been sporadic, then silent. Command had given her 24 hours to plan and execute a rescue operation. 24 hours to bring them home. Or to fail, just like before. Jasmine pushed that thought away, but it clung to her like smoke. 2 years ago, she had led a similar mission. Different country, different terrain, same stakes. She had made a call, trusted her instincts, and 3 soldiers had died because of it. The official report cleared her of wrongdoing. The investigation concluded she had made the best decision with the information available. But reports and investigations did not silence the voices she heard at night, did not erase the faces of the families she had faced at the memorial service. Captain, we have the satellite images you requested. Lieutenant Beck entered the room, a young officer with sharp eyes and a calm demeanor that Jasmine had come to rely on. He spread the images across the table, pointing to key features. Heavy vegetation here and here. This ridge provides cover, but it is also where we expect enemy positions. The valley route is more exposed, but faster. Jasmine examined the images, her mind running through scenarios. Speed versus safety. Direct versus strategic. Every choice carried risk, and every risk carried consequences that would follow her for years. What is your recommendation? She asked Beck. He looked surprised by the question. Officers rarely asked their subordinates for strategic input during active operations. But Jasmine had learned that ego was a liability in the field. Good ideas came from unexpected places, and dismissing them could cost lives. The valley, Beck said after a moment. The ridge provides better cover, but if we encounter resistance there, we will be pinned down with limited options. The valley keeps us mobile. We can adapt faster if the situation changes. Jasmine nodded slowly. It was the same conclusion she had reached, but hearing it confirmed helped. Or perhaps it just spread the responsibility, made the decision feel less solitary. She hated that thought. A leader did not seek to distribute blame. A leader owned the outcome, whatever it was. "Gather the team," she said. "We brief in 30 minutes. Beck left, and Jasmine was alone again with the map and her thoughts. She closed her eyes, breathing slowly, using the technique she had learned from the counselor command had assigned after the failed mission. Acknowledge the fear. Do not fight it. Understand what it is protecting you from. Then decide if that protection serves you or limits you. Her fear was protecting her from pain, from guilt, from the weight of knowing that decisions directly affected whether people lived or died. It was a reasonable fear, a human fear. But it was also a fear that could paralyze her, make her hesitate when decisiveness was required, or make her reckless when caution was needed. The question was not whether she felt fear. The question was whether she would let it command her. 30 minutes later, her team assembled in the briefing room. 12 soldiers, handpicked for their skills and experience. She knew their names, their strengths, their families. She knew that Rodriguez had a daughter starting college in the fall, that Kim was training for a marathon, that Patterson played guitar and wrote songs he would never show anyone. They were not just assets on a mission roster. They were people, and she was about to lead them into danger. Jasmine stood before them, shoulders back, voice steady. This was the moment when her fear either controlled her or she controlled it. "Our objective is simple," she began, pointing to the map. 12 soldiers need extraction. Intelligence suggests they are mobile but injured, moving slowly through this sector. Enemy patrols are active in the region, but their patterns are predictable. We have a window of opportunity that closes at dawn. She walked them through the plan, step by step. The valley approach, the extraction points, the contingencies if things went wrong. Her voice was calm, clear, authoritative. No one in the room could see the doubt churning beneath the surface. That was part of the job. A leader carried the weight, so others could focus on their tasks. "This is a high-risk operation," she continued, meeting each soldier's eyes. "I will not lie to you about that. But these are our people out there. They would do the same for us. Questions?" Rodriguez raised her hand. "Captain, the valley route leaves us exposed to aerial surveillance. If they spot us before we reach the extraction point, we lose our advantage." "Correct," Jasmine acknowledged. "That is why we move at night, using thermal camouflage and maintaining strict noise discipline. We become invisible. We move like ghosts." Kim spoke up next. "What if the intelligence is wrong? What if they are not where we think they are?" It was the question Jasmine had been asking herself since she received the mission briefing. Intelligence was often incomplete, sometimes inaccurate. Soldiers made life and death decisions based on information that was, at best, educated guesses. "Then we adapt," Jasmine said firmly. "We have 3 potential zones where they might be holding position. We search methodically. We do not panic, and we do not abandon the mission until we have exhausted every option. We bring them home." The certainty in her voice was partially performance, but it was also truth. She had learned that confidence was not the absence of doubt. Confidence was the decision to act despite doubt, to trust in training and preparation, even when outcomes were uncertain. The team dispersed to prepare their equipment. Jasmine remained in the briefing room, staring at the map one more time. The valley route was the right choice. She believed that. But belief was not guarantee. Lieutenant Beck returned, carrying 2 gear bags. "Your equipment, Captain. I took the liberty of checking everything twice." "Thank you, Beck." She appreciated his thoroughness. Details mattered in operations like this. A loose strap, a dead battery, a miscalibrated radio could mean the difference between success and catastrophe. Captain, Beck said hesitantly. May I speak freely? Jasmine nodded. The team trusts you, he said. They know about Kandahar. They know what happened. And they still trust you. Jasmine felt something shift in her chest. She had not realized how much she needed to hear that. For 2 years, she had carried the weight of Kandahar alone, convinced that everyone saw her as the officer who got soldiers killed. But Beck's words suggested something different. Perhaps they saw her as the officer who had faced failure and kept serving, who had learned from tragedy and continued leading. Kandahar taught me something, Jasmine said quietly. It taught me that fear is not the enemy. Arrogance is. Thinking you have all the answers, that you can control every variable. I was so confident back then. I thought confidence meant certainty. Now I know better. Confidence means accepting uncertainty and still making the best decision you can. Beck smiled slightly. That is why we trust you, Captain. 3 hours later, the team was in position. The valley stretched before them, bathed in moonlight. Jasmine could see every rock, every shadow, every potential threat. Her heart was steady. Her mind was clear. The fear was still there, a quiet presence at the edge of her awareness, but it was no longer in control. She signaled the advance, and the team moved as one unit, silent and precise. Whatever happened next, she would face it. Not because she was fearless, but because she had learned that courage was not the absence of fear. Courage was fear walking forward anyway. Sergeant Diana Foster had seen 23 years of service, and she knew when something was about to go wrong. It was an instinct developed through countless missions, a sixth sense that whispered warnings when everything appeared calm. Right now, that instinct was screaming. She stood in the command tent at Forward Operating Base Sentinel, watching the younger soldiers prepare for what should have been a routine perimeter check. The base sat in a contested valley, surrounded by mountains that provided both protection and vulnerability. For 3 weeks, things had been quiet. Too quiet. Enemy forces had pulled back, surveillance detected minimal activity, and command had started talking about scaling down operations. Diana knew better. Quiet did not mean safe. Sometimes quiet meant the storm was gathering strength. Sergeant Foster, the perimeter teams are ready for deployment. Corporal James Whitmore approached her, clipboard in hand. He was 24, eager, competent. He reminded Diana of herself 2 decades ago, back when she believed that following protocol and working hard was enough to guarantee success. Hold them for a moment, Diana said, still studying the topographical map spread across the table. Something about the patterns did not sit right. Enemy forces had retreated to specific positions in the mountains, positions that seemed random until you understood the terrain. Those positions provided clear sightlines to every approach to the base. Sergeant, we are on schedule. If we delay, we will miss the rotation window. Whitmore checked his watch, concern creasing his young face. He was not wrong. Discipline meant following schedules, maintaining routines. But experience sometimes meant knowing when to break them. Diana looked up at him, seeing the certainty in his eyes. She remembered that certainty, that belief that the world operated according to rules and plans. Life had taught her otherwise. The world was chaos, barely contained by structure. And survival often depended on recognizing when structure was failing. Tell me what you see when you look at this map, she said, gesturing to the spread of terrain markers and position indicators. Whitmore stepped closer, examining the map with focused attention. I see our perimeter routes, designated checkpoints, and known enemy positions from last week's surveillance. Standard defensive posture. Now look at where those enemy positions are relative to our patrol routes. Whitmore studied the map more carefully. Diana watched as understanding slowly dawned in his expression. The enemy positions formed a pattern, A semicircle that would allow coordinated fire on any patrol leaving the base through standard routes. They are watching our patterns, Whitmore said slowly. They know our schedule. They have been watching for 3 weeks, Diana confirmed. Learning our routines. Waiting for the moment we become comfortable. And today, with command talking about scaling down, we are at our most vulnerable. Whitmore looked shaken. What do we do? It was the right question, but Diana heard the unspoken fear beneath it. What they did next could save lives or cost them. The weight of that decision pressed down on her shoulders, familiar and heavy. She had carried this weight for years, and it never got lighter. You just got stronger at bearing it. We changed the approach, Diana said decisively. Alternate routes, staggered timing, increased surveillance before we commit to movement. And we go to elevated alert status. That requires authorization from command, Whitmore pointed out. They will want justification, evidence, I know. Diana straightened, feeling the familiar tension between instinct and protocol. She had no concrete evidence, no intercepted communications or confirmed sightings. Just experience, pattern recognition, and the uncomfortable feeling that had kept her alive through 2 decades of combat. She could play it safe. Follow standard procedure, send the patrols out on schedule, hope her instincts were wrong. If nothing happened, no one would question her. But if she was right, soldiers would die, or she could trust herself. Demand the alert status, face the questions and potential reprimand from officers who had not spent years reading the subtle signs of approaching danger. Risk her reputation on an instinct she could not prove. Fear crept in, not of physical danger, but of being wrong, of looking foolish, of damaging her credibility right when younger soldiers like Whitmore were learning to trust their own judgment by watching hers. 20-3. Years of service could be undermined by one bad call made public. Diana felt the fear, acknowledged it, and set it aside. This was not about her reputation. This was about the 18-year-old private who had shown her pictures of his newborn son yesterday. About the medic who baked cookies and shared them with everyone. About Whitmore, standing before her with trust in his eyes, believing she would make the right call. Get me Colonel Bradford on the line, Diana said firmly. I am requesting immediate elevation to alert status and authorization to alter patrol protocols. Whitmore moved quickly to establish the connection. Diana used the waiting moments to center herself, drawing on the core of strength she had built through years of facing exactly these kinds of decisions. Power was not about never feeling fear. Power was about feeling fear and choosing action anyway. The radio crackled. Bradford here. What is your situation, Sergeant Foster? Diana took a breath. Sir, I am requesting elevated alert status and protocol deviation for perimeter operations. I have reason to believe we are under surveillance and potentially facing a coordinated threat. What is your evidence? Bradford's voice was neutral, professional. He was asking the reasonable question, the one any commanding officer should ask. I have no concrete evidence, sir, Diana admitted. I have 23 years of experience and instincts that have kept soldiers alive in situations where protocol said everything was fine. I am asking you to trust that experience now. The silence stretched long. Diana could hear her own heartbeat, steady and strong. She had made her case. The decision was Bradford's, but she had done what needed doing. Speaking truth, even when truth was based on intangibles. Request granted, Bradford said finally. Elevate to alert status. You have authorization to modify patrol protocols as you see fit. But, Sergeant, I will need a full briefing on this within the hour. Understood, sir. Thank you. Diana felt relief, but also the renewed weight of responsibility. She had been given authority to act on her instincts. Now she had to be right. She turned to Whitmore. Sound the alert. Get those patrol routes changed. I want eyes on those mountain positions before anyone leaves this base. The next 3 hours were controlled chaos. Soldiers moved with purpose. Equipment was redistributed. Surveillance was intensified. Diana coordinated everything, her voice calm and authoritative, even as her mind ran through countless scenarios. At hour 4, the surveillance team reported movement in the mountains. Multiple enemy positions activating, moving into assault formation. They had been waiting for the scheduled patrol departure, planning an ambush that would have devastated the base's defensive capabilities. Because Diana had trusted her instincts, because she had acted despite fear of being wrong, the base was ready. The ambush never materialized. Enemy forces, seeing the elevated alert status and changed protocols, withdrew rather than engage a prepared defense. That evening, Whitmore found Diana outside the command tent, watching the sun set over the mountains that had nearly become a battlefield. "You saved lives today, Sergeant," he said quietly. "If we had run those patrols on schedule, we would have lost people." Diana nodded slowly. "And if I had been wrong, I would have looked like a paranoid veteran jumping at shadows. That is the thing about leadership, Corporal. You do not get to choose between safe options. You get to choose between risks, and then you live with the outcome. How do you do it?" Whitmore asked. "How do you make those calls without knowing for certain?" Diana considered the question, thinking about all the years that had brought her to this moment. All the fear she had felt and overcome. All the times she had doubted herself but acted anyway. "You train until your skills become instinct," she said finally. "You learn to trust yourself, not because you are always right, but because you are willing to be wrong for the right reasons. And you remember that real strength is not about being fearless. It is about being afraid and still doing what needs to be done." She looked at Whitmore, seeing in him the next generation of soldiers who would face their own impossible choices. "Your fear will tell you to play it safe, to follow protocol, to avoid standing out. But there will come a day when safety means action, when protocol fails, when standing out saves lives. On that day, you will have to choose between comfort and courage, between protecting yourself and protecting others." "What if I choose wrong?" Whitmore asked. "Then you learn, and you keep serving," Diana replied. "That is all any of us can do. The power to lead, to make hard calls, to trust yourself in impossible situations, it does not come from being perfect. It comes from being willing to be imperfect and still showing up." The sun dipped below the mountain peaks, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. Diana felt the familiar ache in her shoulders, the tiredness that came from carrying responsibility. But beneath the tiredness was something stronger, something that had been forged through years of facing fear and choosing action. She had learned that her power did not come from rank or experience alone. It came from the moment she stopped waiting for certainty and started trusting herself. From the decision to speak up when silence was safer. From the willingness to stand alone if standing alone meant doing right. Her power began where her fear ended. Not because the fear disappeared, but because she had learned to walk through it, carrying others with her, showing them that courage was not the absence of fear, but the refusal to let fear make the final decision. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new fears, new impossible choices. But Diana would face them the same way she had faced today, with honesty, with experience, and with the quiet strength of someone who had learned that true power was not about dominance over others, but about mastery of oneself.